Margie, the room is on mute, so we're not hearing you. Those of you virtually, just stand by. There we go.
Yeah. Do you have audio, Kathy? Okay, great. As we're getting started, and before you continue on the net present value aggregate, I think Greg Wright from Priority Power, you said HS Sinclair, has a question for you. So please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask about the leaving the FQP, the island model, I think you call an island, is leaving that. So are you true? But then you mentioned market plus. So are you really, when you say island, you mean between leaving the FQP and joining another market system, or are you truly being an island, meaning all the resources? Because I was looking in here at your scenarios. I just didn't know where you're getting the numbers for a market scenario. I was confused on it. So can you help me with that?
Yeah. So the question was from in the room, what are the assumptions around the market interaction? Is it a conversion from the SPV marketplace to Month Plus, or what's going on in there? And the answer is we really truly are just like modeling it as an island. Like it is
all your own resource, only your own resources, not accessing any market other than maybe bilateral contracts or something.
In the model, it's island. So that's what we're saying here is like this is just a look about like participating specifically, and that's what we're asked from folks is like understanding exactly what the station marketplace was. Now, I totally agree with you. Is that exactly where you would end up? Probably not, but I would say that like this scenario was never meant to identify like an actual pathway. It's not what we would actually want to do. What we're trying to is to start the conversation, partly for that 2028 filing where we have to demonstrate the value of or the cost benefit of participating in the marketplace. Now, is it an accurate assumption? Could you be considering bilateral agreements? Could you be assuming some kind of international market plus? Yes, those could be part of it. In general, we are really a peninsula. When it comes to the SPV market, we have very specific ties to the SPV market through Oklahoma. On the western side of our service territory, we have 3 different HVDC ties. One's connected us to the PNM system, one's connected us to the PSO system, Public Service Company of Colorado, and also one in the south connected us to the El Paso Electric.
Right.
So there are some assumptions that could be made different than what we're making today, but I would never say that we are proposing this as a true alternative, but instead a perspective to understand the specific interaction from SPP market. Part of that, and most of that conversation is really driven upon what the impact was of the winter PR1 addition requirements, and whether that has fundamentally changed the cost benefit of the SPS or the SPP interaction.
Sure.
Yeah. No, good question. Yeah.
Okay, Justin, I think back to you.
Sorry, that would be. Go ahead, please.
No worries. Okay. All right. So the NPV comparison. So all that nameplate additions, that just gives you a general idea of what the resource mix looks like. But what does it look like to compare these financially, these different scenarios? We have this slide here. It generally just tells us, what these different load forecasts. I don't think that this is a real comparison, though. You can't really compare the differences between these load forecasts and net present value because there's a different assumption of what you are serving. So although the net present value might be higher in a constrained versus a low scenario, you are serving a different amount of customers between those two scenarios. So yes, of course, when you are adding more customers, you are going to see a higher net present value because you have more resources to serve those customers. And that kind of conversation doesn't really translate well into this. So we'll move on from this one. In general, though, there's some items of note here. Generally, when on these slides, when we're making these comparisons, we'll have a table that gives you the name, the description, an understanding of whether emerging tech is available, and the net present value. Underneath the table, we'll have a general description of our kind of our key takeaways, and also, you know, some important notes here, like the capacity payment cost. You know, that's you know, a stand-in for what if the model is not able to meet its capacity obligation at times, what is the cost? And that is what we call the cost, the cone, which is the cost of new entry. And this is a value that's established by the Southwest Power Pool. It was recently updated to $139 per point, $139.85 per kW year. That is the current cone. It had previously been established at around $85 to $86, and it had been several years between that update. The expectation going forward at Southwest Power Pool is this to be updated much more regularly to reflect the current state of the market. And you know, and it ties to the cost of new entry of a CT, combustion turbine. In general, in the resource adequacy construct at Southwest Power Pool, the highest amount that you would be paying as a deficiency payment is actually 2 times that amount. And that 2 times amount is what we have in the model, is $279.70. So in the model, we do have that if there is a shortfall in capacity in any one year of the 20-year planning horizon, there is a penalty cost, and it's established at $279.70 per kW a year. Additionally, we have a cost of unexpected energy, and in the model we have it set as $2,000 per, or I'm sorry, we actually have the penalties in the model much higher to root out these values, but we replace what is modeled with a new value of $2,000 per megawatt hour. So you're going to see in some of these different scenarios, specifically like the island scenarios, where you're going to see a really large increase in the net present values on some of these scenarios where we take out the winter PRM, or we have an island scenario and we have unexpected energy. That unexpected energy has a $2,000 per megawatt hour penalty cost that is embedded into the net present value cost. So we really translate the expected uncertain energy into a financial penalty to be able to differentiate the portfolios on a financial component. But what you should really be thinking about is that is uncertain energy. That although we're having a penalty associated with that to translate into a financial metric, it really represents not serving customers with those megawatt hours. Okay. Let's see. So on this next slide we have here is the gas price scenarios. In general, what we're seeing with the high gas price sensitivity, I can't remember who was asking, I think that was Dr. Palomino. What was our gas price assumptions here? 50% gas and energy price increases according to our base, and 50% decrease from our base value. I think that's generally getting at your question, Dr. Palomino. In general, the net present values, what we are assuming that in a high gas price scenario, you would be developing more renewables, and that would ultimately cost you $1.38 billion as compared to our base scenario. In a situation where we have low gas prices, you're going to see a much more a larger build out of thermal resources similar to the base, and it's going to be around $1.47 billion cheaper than the base scenario.
Just what is the base? I'm sorry.
The base is what we compare everything back to. That's the constraint.
What is the? I mean, where did you get the base?
That's our. So you're talking about the gas price forecast?
Yeah, the base gas price forecast. What is that? Is that your current where you're at currently? Is that the current, or is that forecasting?
Yeah, it's a forecasted value, and our forecast value represents a mixed blend forecast. So we have 3 different sources on gas price forecasts, and we combine those into a single forecast. But we take it from 3 different sources to make the forecasting. And then you forecast it either increase or decrease. Yes. From that base, and then you went off your high and low off of that. Yes. Okay. Exactly. We also altered our market energy prices, assuming those same kind of impacts.
The same trend.
Yes.
Okay.
I apologize. I think that we just had a side conversation in the room, but just to let everyone know that the question in the room was, what is the source of the base gas price forecast? And the answer is that it's a mixed forecast from 3 different sources. And the high and low gas are 50% increase and decrease upon that base, with corresponding energy price forecasts related to those increases and decreases. All right. So for the island scenarios, and this is really where I was kind of making a point to mention that unexpected energy cost assumptions. You can see that we saw different resource builds. We see volumes of resource differences change, but you really can see an impact on the net present value, partially driven by both the resource selections and also the cost assumptions related to uncertain energy. So those millions of megawatt hours translates into a $20.57 billion increase on an island with no wind or PRM, and in the island scenario, almost $9 billion. So to remind folks, this is a scenario where we are removing requirements, and when we remove requirements, we are seeing an increase in cost driven by rising unexpected energy. And that's really what I was trying to get at earlier when we were saying it's a protective measure. It allows you to build resources that are able to serve you in all hours of the year at the right volume of those resources as well. All right. So summary NPV comparisons for existing resource changes. I thought this was a really interesting slide. Obviously, the net present value deltas are going to be much smaller when we're talking about the replacement of a specific resource that's less than 30 megawatts. So what we're seeing as a result from replacing Quay with a CT as versus an LDS, our current model is indicating that a long duration storage resource at Quay County is a potentially a much more cost-effective solution than replacing with a CT at that location. So really interesting. This is some of the first modeling results where I'm seeing a long duration storage, or what we call an emergent tech resource, being proposed and actually representing a cost reduction to customers. All right. Okay, so this, we're showing this slide here, but it's a little bit incomplete. We have our base scenario here, and we're comparing it to the data centers. The data center Texas versus data center Mexico, those are both going to be more expensive than your base scenario. Now, we are not talking about cost allocation or anything like that. We are just talking about, incrementally serving customers. And a similar conversation like we were talking about with the load forecasting scenarios. Can you compare the low forecast scenario to your constrained planning forecast scenario when you are fundamentally serving different volumes of customers? So your resources are going up and your customers are also going up, between those low forecast and planning forecast scenarios. Similarly, in the data center scenarios, we're talking about the incremental increase of the load forecast by 1 gigawatt. So there will always be an increase to serve. There will be an increase on the net present value because the underlying customers you are serving are increasing from the base. So, just a $4.5 billion increase against the base doesn't tell you much. What we're really trying to understand here, and we don't have all the modeling results today, is understanding what it means to have a data center that is served by all resource types, and then what a data center that's being served by only non-carbon emitting resource types. So just mark this in your mind as further answers to be provided here once we have the modeling results to understand what the cost delta is between these two different scenarios. All right, so that went through our net present value comparisons. I could jump into the plant upgrades for a pause, maybe open up for some comments.
Yeah, let's see if there are questions about the net present value summary slide that Justin's presented, and then I think we can do a quick update on the plant upgrades, and then we should ask all our stakeholders, what are the topics from what he's presented so far today you want to dive more deeply into? I think that would be good, and we can bring up some of the supplemental slides needed. So questions so far about what Justin just presented? I see that Adam, you've got your hand up, please again, and introduce again yourself and ask your question if you wouldn't mind, please.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Alex Palomino. I know it's not up there. I'm here with Holland and Hart representing the New Mexico large customer group. This is maybe a difficult question to answer, but I'm curious to hear how the company thinks about the difference in NPV from the low gas scenario to the high gas scenario. I'm not up to speed on, the Public Service Commission's sort of requirements for how the company sort of selects a preferred plan. But from sort of just that slide, it showed like it was plus or minus $1.5 billion. Does the company consider that to be uh, a significant change? How does the company weigh the NPV differences between portfolios against other goals or interests when sort of building up preferred portfolios?
Yes, so thank you for that question. What I would say is that today we're really just trying to present the material. I don't know that we're at the point right now where we're trying to make a conclusion on the results that we're seeing today. I think it's helping us to like establish a conversation with stakeholders, get perspective. Are we getting the right kind of mix? Is this the right understanding? Is the right viewpoint on what we should be modeling here? I mean, I think that this is a perfect opportunity to be like, well, is the upper and lower bounds the right upper and lower bounds to be discussing? Should it be narrower? Should it be wider? Should it, is this even a value to have that conversation at all? So I'm not trying to be to kind of push this question out as much as I would prefer to have a conversation about it with stakeholders.
No, understood.
And I apologize, is it Adam or Alex?
It's Alex. I'll make sure to log into Zoom before I get on these next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I apologize for calling me Adam. We'll make
No worries.
sure. As Justin said, this conversation about the weighting and the priorities between the characteristics is a future conversation I think we'll have as we assess and interpret all the modeling results to inform the statement of needs. So that's a to be determined conversation, and we hope you'll continue participating so you can be part of that conversation. Thanks, Alex. Other questions? Any in the room on the net present value results? Okay, Justin, you'd like to continue talking about the plant upgrades that you might want to explain to people where that fits on the mind map.
Yes. So on the mind map, this is going to be the lower left-hand corner. We talked a little bit about some of the these different scenarios when we're talking about Quay, Cunningham. We'll also be talking about Jones 3 and 4. So this is the new one that we have not been modeling, but we believe that we want to discuss this with stakeholders because we were reviewing this project internally and looking at this and trying to figure out, well, how does this fit into the IRP process? And the way the IRP process is written today is that a facility, a generating facility that increases its capacity by more than 20 megawatts must ultimately be compared to other projects in a competitive solicitation. So what we're describing here is Jones 3 and 4. These are two CTs near Lubbock, Texas right now. We have an opportunity to go through this project. It's an upgrade that for each unit is 19.5 megawatts. Our interpretation though is that Jones 3 and 4 is a facility, and that would be a 40 megawatt increase for the facility. So we wanted to just bring this up to stakeholders that, this is something that we may want to like look at. Partially for this graphical reason right now. These are just general, pricing that we saw in the last RFP and general where we expect the Jones 3 and 4 upgrade to kind of cost. Now, we don't necessarily have all the modeling parameters today to do this right now. We will be working on getting those, but we believe that it's significantly cheaper alternative to existing resources or existing. That's what I was at. It's a fair. It is a good alternative to selecting an incremental resource on the system. So although it's 40 megawatts, I mean that's a fairly small amount. It does have a very low, dollar per kW as compared to other resources that we'd be looking at. So more to come. We wanted to bring this up, where we think that an opportunity is existing on our current system, an opportunity for 40 megawatt increase. The really significant value to me is the in-service dates. So you can see here October 2029 and October 2030. So just to remind folks, we had a 24 RFP, and that 2024 RFP was targeting resources between 2027 and 2030. After the 24 RFP, we had a number of resources that dropped out of our preferred portfolio. We saw increasing load onto our in subsequent forecasts, and we issued another RFP, one that we are currently in the middle of evaluation. We're actually concluding that evaluation very soon. And in that RFP, we were targeting resources between 2030 and 2032. So, in general, is it likely to be able to get a resource, 40 megawatts or 100 megawatts, no matter what size, before 2030? And that's where I feel like there's a lot of value here, is that it's 40 megawatt incremental increase. It's fairly cheap as compared to other dollar per kW capital costs. And it can also potentially come on much sooner. The idea of going through an RFP process, would potentially provide some comparisons. However, that process, does have a time component with it. And that's why we want to discuss it in to potentially offer this up as an item for the statement of need in the IRP. So just bringing this up to people's attentions.
What was that Quay count? Quay, is that what it's called? What was the word rating of that one?
The megawatt rating?
Yeah.
That's about
Your question.
oh, sorry.
Thanks.
The question in the room was what was the megawatt rating of the Quay County facility that we've been discussing earlier? I'm gonna say less than 30. I think the number is 24, but it's somewhere less than 30.
So was that 30 in that chart you just had up there? Was that in that CT chart or not? And you're taking that out?
This project is not in the chart because this is a fairly new thing we've identified.
No, I'm talking about the Quay County one.
Yes.
Was it in that stack, the blue stack there?
Yes. It was.
What about the Cunningham, was that in?
It was.
So, what was it under?
Let's see what it's.
Yeah, let me go.
Because it's hard to read the labels on the bottom.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Right there. Yeah, so on these charts,
It's we're squinting.
yeah,
I think you had the bar charts that were gray and then blue and.
oh, yes.
That's what I was saying.
Just
Resource addition.
we just did it like 2 slides ago.
Yeah, yes, that's that is gonna be the appendix material.
Oh,
There's
yep,
one.
missed it.
I did.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
we go.
no. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's what I'm talking about. Is that
Yeah.
Quay County in that stack, that
It-
blue stack?
It is not in the stack.
Okay.
This is just comparison to generic resources. This is not comparison to a specific replacement of Quay County.
Okay.
I will say that the idea though is they are not mutually exclusive. We wouldn't want to be comparing, replacing Quay County with Jones. Replacing Quay County, it is in the 2030s that we're talking about that, and that would be a specific replacement of that resource. I think about resource additions in two different ways. You have replacement generation and you have incremental generation. Quake County would be a representation of replacement. We have a current obligation to meet customer needs, and that's resources being current customer needs. So whatever we have to do, it is to help service existing customers today. Now, this with Jones 3 and 4 upgrade is a potential to serve incremental customers today. So making a real dent in being able to serve our customers in a much more near term.
And Cunningham.
Cunningham is a replacement. So that would be,
True. Replacement.
yeah, it's a true replacement. In the future,
That same megawatts.
yes, that's it. All right.
Great. Any questions on Zoom before we're gonna ask all stakeholders, where are some areas you wanna dig deeper today? From the mind map, and we can use the reference of these scenarios or anything Justin has described. Let's ask first, for folks in the room, are any of these topics that you would like to, at this point, go into some more detail on, because we have plenty of time for that, and we'll ask the same thing of the stakeholders on the Zoom community. Any? Charlie?
Just Charlie Carroll with New Mexico Junior College. Does the current administration reflect on your plans? And so how?
Yes, thank you. So the question in the room from Dr. Carroll was, does policy, this current policy, I'm assuming you mean federal policy?
Yes.
This federal policy, is it accounted for in our scenarios? The answer to that is yes, and it's most prevalent when we start talking about tax credits. So one of the things we mentioned for wind and solar resources is that our current modeling assumptions are that as we add generic resources, by 2030, there will be an increase to wind and solar generic resources, because you're losing the 30% of that value. So yes, there is a very direct input of federal policy and how it impacts generic pricing of projects.
Are you thinking of other policies?
No. What's the federal policy today under this current administration? How's it impacting their planning for selling?
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways that you cannot compare the 23 IRP, that was our last IRP, and this current IRP. But one of the assumptions that we had in the last IRP was the maintenance of tax credits through the entire optimization period, through the entire 20-year planning horizon. This IRP model that we have set up today does not make that same assumption, and is fundamentally changes at 2030 on prices of solar and wind resources based upon the tax credits going away in the One Big Beautiful Bill.
So one thing I'll add to that is, we're reflecting what we know today. What we're not doing is taking into account any sort of administration changes, and then what do those next changes look like? So it is very difficult. Obviously for all of us to guess what future politics are, and where will some of these things like PTCs, if they come back again in the future, when and if, and what would they look like? So we have to base it on what we know today. And as Justin said, we made a pretty big change from where we were in the last IRP process. The other aspect is we are taking into account where are the costs at today because of federal policies around bringing in some of those equipment from other countries. That has driven up those costs, and those costs I think are reflected as part of our within our generics. And so it's not just on PTCs, but it's also just the actual cost of those generic resources.
And what's relevant to this conversation is if there is an anticipated uncertainty that you can imagine in policy that you would propose to be looked at, today and tomorrow would be a good time to bring that up, right? So tax credits are one piece. If there's something else you're thinking of that is an important possible uncertainty in policy, something to consider. It may not be able to be modeled, but that's what this conversation is about. So if you're thinking of something specific, jot it down and we'll bring it back tomorrow. Yeah. Are there any of these these scenarios on the mind map that people want to dig into in more detail? Let's ask folks on the virtual room. Kathy, are you seeing anything where we should spend some time on the detailed slides at this point?
No, it's looking pretty quiet on the chat. I would encourage folks, though, this is your chance to really consider these different scenarios. I know the islanding last time generated quite a bit of questions. The RPS scenarios of what are the parameters that Excel has included in those scenarios? Now's the time.
Question.
Yeah.
So,
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Jennifer Gresson with EDC here in Hops. So on the model where do I see what the model would be but for the ETA? So if we're trying to, we got Texas here and everything, but is there just one way to just say, here's what happened, here's what this very specific policy does? Because I'm seeing, I can look at what an extra gigawatt data center is in Texas, and then the ETA layers on the non-emitting, which changes presumably the cost, right? I mean, is it, you just don't have all the tools in the tool bag kind of thing, I guess. And so what is it that we live 5 miles on this side of the border? Because we look at that, what does it mean to build data center in Texas versus New Mexico, just right here. So is there a way to look at, here's the but for ETA, here's the model?
Yes, ma'am. So question in the room is, where do we see the impacts of the ETA? How are we going to answer the question of what is ETA due to resource build out and cost to customers?
Yes.
That is very much going to be an answer in this modeling. So today, when we're looking at our mind tree or our mind map here, the IRP modeling, this big square right here, that's going to represent our base case. That's going to represent serving customers with the least cost, all Texas and New Mexico, with no inclusion of a state-specific requirement. So that will give you your base case. Your change case scenario, we're going to have a couple of different views of what that looks like. The most obvious one is going to be this split scenario. I really hate that we don't have this done for you today. But we spun this model up multiple times for the past couple of weeks and all with the weekend, and we just weren't getting it right. So what the idea here though is that on this split system, when we run this model, we are taking the base model. It's going to have thermal resources. You've seen, let me just jump through here real quick. This is the base model. This will be your base case in comparison to what ETA is costing. So you can see right here that you have a large build out of CTs or CCs and CTs. Now, what we're going to do to this model right here is we will take the portfolio. We're going to look at Texas and New Mexico sales. Every year we'll have like a ratio of, okay, Texas is at 50%, New Mexico is at 50%. Through the next 20 years, New Mexico is going to gain 1% over time. That's not actual, it's just a represent. So the ratios are going to change slightly over time. We will take those numbers and we will take the thermal resources that are selected and match that allocation. So what we've assigned as a Texas resource will stay locked in the model. And the thermal resources that would have been selected but for the ETA, we will be removing. And then we will respin the model, and the model will only be allowed to select non-carbon emitting resources. And once we do that, we'll have a portfolio that is keeping Texas whole and not impacted by an ETA compliance goal, and then showing an incremental increase on for ETA. Then you'll be able to take that base scenario and this ETA scenario and see what the cost delta is between the net present values. And you'll see exactly what the cost is.
Will you please read your legend here and give people a picture? You can't, the letters are pretty small. So I know you talked about the shaded versus the more intense colors, but can you describe what's in the legend there, Justin, so people have, because all of these are similar and it'd be nice to acquaint people to the colors and technologies.
Yeah, and everybody's gonna have to, I owe every apology. I am not a design major. So the color mix, I chose these and I'm not so sure that they were good choices. But, so what we have here, let's just look at 2047 here. And so you can see that the first two lines in the legend are very similar red colors. You don't have to know, you don't have to be able to, you can be colorblind and still read this. The lower line represents the net peak demand. The upper line represents the net peak demand plus our planning reserve margin requirements. So that is the goal that we're trying to meet. And what we're showing here on the nameplate additions is overall, what is the nameplate of how many resources that we're talking about here. So let me move this down a little bit so I can see this. So you can see that down here, the gray is the existing demand response. And then you have a pinkish color. That's generic gas combustion or combined cycles. The blue line represents existing gas CTs that are on this that will be on the system at that time, 2047. The light blue represents new gas CTs. So these are combustion turbines that are not on the system today, but we project would be by 2047. After that, you're going to have this brownish looking color right here. That's the existing solar PV. I'm going to take a quick step back here. So we have this existing ST. That yellow right here starts out, and then over time, starting in the 2030s, you see it diminishing. That's the steam rooms today. So those are like Nichols units, Nichols 1, 2, and 3 in Amarillo, Jones 1 and 2 in Lubbock, the Tolk, well, it doesn't represent Tolk, the Tolk coal generation is right here represented by the black. You can see, so it's going off, before the 2030 start, but that yellow is reducing over time. And that, that yellow, that blue, that red, that black, that represents our firm dispatchable technologies, in addition to these blue, which represents batteries. But you can see as our firm capacity in the system goes away, if you were to normalize this to remove load growth, you would still see that the system needs firm dispatchable technologies. And then after you get to that, you get to your existing solar photovoltaic, you get generic solar photovoltaic, then you get existing wind projects, generic wind, and then we get the 4-hour batteries that are existing at the time 24/7, and then light blue would be future batteries. These are all 4-hour batteries, by the way, on this. And we have a conversation about that probably tomorrow. So that's this on a nameplate basis. Now, you're going to see, the question that would probably occur to you is, why are you building so far over the red lines? Isn't that over procurement? And that's when we start talking about accredited capacity. So this is our summer accredited capacity. You can see, I'm gonna flip through here a few times. Here's our winter. In general, what we see is that the winter becomes the binding constraint in our model. So you really start building a lot of resources specifically targeted towards that winter pyramid part of it. Not because it is a higher net peak demand, but because there is a requirement to have enough resources to meet a higher planning reserve margin, which is 30%, 36% winter. So I'm going to focus on just the summer for a second here, because I think that this gets us what we want to see. The difference in size is important here. So you can see relatively, you see a large amount of peak. Now let's look over here at the wind resources. You can see a very significant volume of generic wind right here. That's on a nameplate basis. On the accredited basis, that's where we're at. So you can really see that renewable resources, there's a lot of value, but as a capacity resource, there's very little accreditation of resources. In general, 30% is probably what you can think about for a wind resource, 30% accreditation for it. So a 100 MW wind project, you're gonna get 30% of its total nameplate that you can contribute to your resource adequacy requirements towards meeting your native obligation and your planning reserve margin requirements.
Is that SPP? David? I mean, SPP requirements, are you putting that in there?
Yes.
They don't have 30%, do they? Wind, they're not allowing 30%, are they?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting conversation. I mean,
Question.
oh, sorry.
Sorry.
The question was, are these SPP numbers? And yes and no. ELCC accreditation is, for us, calculated by SPP. So they're looking at their entire system. The numbers that we have here are utilizing SPP's data, and then we have to extrapolate over time. So they give us numbers that represent penetration levels. We talked a little bit about this earlier. As you have a system, and you're going to have a mix of resources today, maybe that's 100 megawatts, and they're projecting, or they're projecting that as the ratio, let's say it's a 300 megawatt system, you have 100 megawatts of batteries, 100 megawatts of wind, and 100 megawatts of solar. And as you go through time, relative to what you're serving your customers, those ratios change. Instead of being 30%, 30%, 30%, let's say you were projecting an 80% wind as compared to 30% today, so customer. As that penetration increases, as the ratio of the pie increases for a specific technology type, its resource accreditation goes down. So as penetration increases, accreditation goes down. We call that a declining LPC. That's what we get from SPP. And we translate that on our LNR tables into a time series, but in the model, we're modeling penetration as well. So as you're like what you're seeing in this model right now is as it's adding more solar resources, every megawatt that comes in has less accreditation than the last megawatt. So
up to a point where it flattens out.
yes, up to a point.
It doesn't go to zero.
Yeah.
Like wind in particular is really flattened out because of the amount of wind penetration.
Yes.
Across the Southwest Power Pool is really flattened out about 17–18%. So it's not, you're not seeing for every megawatt of wind we have, we don't see a continued decline dramatically in the LCC, but because solar penetration or battery penetration are still so new or relatively low penetration levels across SPP, we do see those more steeper declines initially as that penetration increases.
But that's what I was thinking. I was confused by when you said 30%. I was thinking more 15 to 18%.
Okay, so do you want to?
No, you don't.
Okay. So this is some like the interesting stuff. Every year these ELCC values get reset. And as you know, when you're talking about those increasing penetration, yes, you do end up at those kind of values. But if the penetration doesn't change, or if there are other assumptions that are changing on the system, accreditation can still change. In fact, what we saw in our latest accreditation values for the upcoming season, so I'm talking like winter 26-27, summer 27, we actually saw more accreditation for our wind resources than what we were expecting. And we did see a 30%. So it can, we are projecting out, and we're projecting out over 20 years. So you want to make sure that you're accurately projecting the values, but they can go up, they can go down. In the near term, you're probably going to see resources like wind being very stable from year to year. Technologies like batteries or solar coming onto the system. You're going to be seeing, you can see significant changes to LCC in these near terms because penetration is so low at this point.
Is your gains plan in that these numbers right there?
Did you say gains?
Gains.
Yes.
Is it in here?
So the question was, is our gains facility in these runs? The answer to the question is yes. To remind folks on the call that may not be familiar, Gaines County is a 5 CT facility that was in our 24 RFP we're expecting that resource to come on before 2030. I can't remember exactly what the model where it's at, but yes, game design.
You can really see it like between 27 and 29, the blue line that just jumps up right in here. See, it's not online here, and then it is here. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent questions. Continue. Let's give folks on Zoom a chance. Again, we're hoping that you can dive into these scenarios so that tomorrow you can comment on whether or not this collection of model runs reflects what you're interested in exploring. So over to Zoom, Kathy, anything on your end?
I'm not seeing, oh, there we go. Chris Leger, please, from Interwest.
Thank you. Chris Leger with the Interwest Energy Alliance. I guess I would like to ask a question on this slide that just might seem like a stupid question, but can you please describe to me how in 2045 a system that has what appears to be over 50% of your load requirements as emitting resources complies with the ETA?
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Leger. The question, is, is this compliant with ETA? I would say that our base model is to assume no state-specific requirement.
So as a follow-up question, I guess I just fail to see the value of that as the base model. And I don't know if that wasn't phrased as a question, but it's the question that is in my mind.
Chris, yep, we lost the room again. Apologies, let's hold on.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my guess is it must refresh ever so often and we just lose our signal. Margie's still on, so let's just give it a minute, please. Yeah, okay, so Margie, they're in the chat. Please stand by, reconnecting. So Chris, we'll just hold your question. We'll come back to you shortly. While we're waiting, hopefully you all have that modeling mind map. We're going to focus on that tomorrow. And the question that we're going to ask you all is, what uncertainties do you want tested in the modeling? So given the radio silence here, you might take a few minutes, look at that mind map and start to think about given what you've heard from Justin, what other uncertainties would you like tested? And make sure that we're getting your input here in the modeling runs.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm hearing you on my computer. We're getting the room restarted.
Okay, looks like everybody's coming in here shortly. Oh, Margie, we're good. Yeah, Thank you. Okay, we have visual to the room. Thank you, Thaddeus.
All right, well,
There we
just
go. Yep.
great, thank you. Let's Chris, do you want to restate your questions so that the room is back in knowledge and we've been having lots of discussions here in the room. So Chris, please repeat your question. Chris Leger from Interwest Energy
Sure.
Alliance. Thank
Thanks.
you.
I guess I don't know. I didn't phrase it as a question. I phrased it as a statement, which is I don't really see the value of having a New Mexico IRP have in its base plan non-compliance with state requirements. And I guess the question is, if that's the intent, describing the value of that would be valuable to me. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, Mr. Leger, for your question. So I would like to bring everybody back to the idea of what SPS is. And SPS is a multi-jurisdictional operating company. So we serve both customers in Texas and New Mexico. We're providing the base or the base modeling runs to assume no state-specific requirements so that we can provide the least cost scenario to service all of our customers. In addition to that, and I'm going to back up to our mind map. There it is. In addition to that, so we have our base model run, and that's going to be serving all of our customers without incorporating a state-specific requirement. And incorporating a state-specific requirement in that base build fundamentally impacts customers who are not underneath that same requirement. So, but we are going to be modeling RPS in a variety of different ways. What we are going to do as our first look is having the split scenario where we take that base build. And once we've identified what the base build is to serve least cost customers, we take the load ratio share, that is the New Mexico load ratio share of the thermal resources, and we remove them. And then we add in the RPS constraint and allow the model to respin with non-carbon emitted resources. And when we do that, it allows us to get an understanding of how do we serve our Texas customers, because this IRP is a New Mexico process. We have to serve all of our customers regardless of whether they live in Texas or New Mexico. So that we have that base run. The RPS requirement is added to the New Mexico respin, and so we'll have the exact expectation of what the ETA will do for the New Mexico load ratio share of the resource build out. Now, that's one look that we're looking at. We're also looking at running the models in a few different ways, and we are also talking about adding the RPS requirement directly in the base. So when we spin the model from the beginning, the load ratio share from New Mexico customers will have the RPS constraint and will allow the model to build. The problem with a scenario like that is there is no way for us to understand in a scenario where the RPS is required to be on top of that to understand what resources are coming in for what customers, for a Texas or a New Mexico customer. So we're trying to provide as much visibility and transparency for both Texas and New Mexico customers on exactly how state-specific requirements are affecting our ability to serve all of our customers equitably.
Yeah, Justin, I think the one thing in addition to all that I'll add is just, we obviously had a lot of dialogue around these concepts as part of the 2024 CCN and the results there. And, the stance and the view and the rules is that there are possibilities for exceptions around this. And so affordability, reliability. And so I think, again, Justin bringing forth the concept that this is an underlying multi-jurisdictional portfolio or a multi-jurisdictional utility, providing that baseline so that we can see what is that additional cost to consumers. And is that, prudent, to then level, so at least we provide, well, the goal is to provide that kind of that baseline, but then have a discussion around the prudency of those additional costs coming in. And then how we want to proceed those dialogues. Again, this is a generic look over 20 years versus, what actually comes into an RFP, but it's just providing that framework and some of that guidance along the way as how do we want to pursue it and some of those discussion points that we obviously will encounter in those future proceedings.
I don't know if the camera was off too. I apologize for that.
We'll see.
I appreciate the answer. Yeah, I appreciate the answer. I do think that bringing up the, I'm sorry, I do appreciate the answer, and I believe that bringing up the,
Hold on, somebody in the room has their mic. We're getting feedback. Chris is in stereo for us virtually. Okay, there we go. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Thank you. I believe that bringing up the possibility of requesting exceptions at this time is just concerning. And I guess I'll leave it there. I think that planning for exceptions is not the policy that New Mexico really is looking for. And so that's a concern. And the fact that SPS has already asked for exceptions for certain gas facilities in front of the PRC means that I don't think it's overreacting to that concern. I think it's a plan that we really should take seriously and consider in this IRP process.
Marsh, can I say something in response to that?
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, Chris, this is Matt Larson at WBK. So I don't think what you're hearing is that there's some kind of base assumption that there'll be an exception granted. I think what we're trying to say is we're trying to test these futures in a variety of different ways, right? And we're trying to look at the cost deltas, the resource changes, things like that by load ratio sharing the base portfolio and pulling thermals out in certain instances to try to see what happens for different futures. So I just want to be clear that there's not an assumption here that some kind of exception is granted. And all of these different scenarios that are reflected on the screen are testing different futures and potentially different pathways if and when the technologies show up and are bid into, an RFP that could potentially solution for that 2045 ETA requirement. Does that make sense?
No, I appreciate that response, Matt, and yes, I understand that. I do think that it is concerning that one of the pathways is, the possibility for requesting exceptions, especially this early in the compliance scheme.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, there's not going to be some kind of request for exceptions that accompanies the IRP filing. That's ultimately going to be determined by what actual projects are bid into competitive RFP.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, thank you, Chris. I'll go to Chelsea in a minute, but Chris, my understanding from the mind map and what Justin and team have presented is all those scenarios in the lower right-hand side of the mind map, which is to meet the 2045 ETA requirements, all of those which have not been run yet are explicitly to look at what the portfolio would look like to meet that in 2045. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's That is important. I would definitely say that if you look at the different groupings of scenarios here, our largest grouping of scenarios is related around RPS. We want to understand, what does it look like if you assume the base assumption, in the original capacity commission. We want to understand what it looks like to develop that system with no new gas at all on the system. We also want to see, like, when we do our split system and we're not seeing, at least in all of our testing so far, we're not seeing these emerging techs getting pulled in like geothermal, nuclear. And even if they're not being selected like natively, what happens if we force them in to understand, utilizing these technologies that we know are on the horizon with our current assumptions, how that will impact that build out. So I do think that, we are looking for, multiple, modeling runs here to provide us an average of what the answer is. I don't think that any one of these scenarios really tells us what the future is, but I think in aggregate, it gives us a better understanding of, where we are going. And I think that, it's very apparent to me between the 23 IRP and 24 or 26 IRP, a lot of assumptions that were made are just not known. Like the tax credits for wind and solar projects, those types of things, and what emerging technologies may show up that don't exist today, or what kind of impacts to capital costs for these technologies may all of a sudden show a reduction or some kind of advancement in technology. So we're trying to find the overall average of information we have today, but it's not necessarily descriptive of ultimately what would be actually selected or available or bid into a future RFP to enable these features.
Okay. So, but what I'm hearing is we might want to have a follow-up conversation with you, Chris, about what the parameters are of those RPS scenarios, because those are critical to your statement and your concerns about for presenting the scenarios that appear to not be RPS and ETA compliant. So maybe we need to follow up with you, Chris, to make sure the parameters of those scenarios in the lower right-hand corner are some that you can buy into.
No, I'm not sure that this is a concern about the scenarios, in as much as it is a concern that I believe that the base case should include compliance, and SPS does not believe that the base case should include compliance. That, I think, is the issue, and I don't believe a discussion will change that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Now we'll note that as an unresolved issue.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Chelsea, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead, Chelsea.
Thanks. Hi, this is Chelsea O'Telling with Energy Futures Group. I just wanted to confirm that the base scenario talked about today, the emerging technologies were allowed to be selected, but Encompass just wasn't picking them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Chelsea, we've been doing some testing on that, and you can see this base emerging tech. So the base scenario that we have did not allow emerging tech, and it's still there. We have that. We have also run that same thing with allowing emerging tech. What we saw was when we allowed emerging tech to come in, it really does have some very specific kind of impacts, I think, related to our load forecast. And the reason let me see if I can normalize something. Yeah, I'm going to try to get to that specific.
You just pass it.
No. Okay, so right here. Okay, so what we did when we allowed emerging tech to come in is we saw long duration storage starting to come in. That's what this purple amount is. We also saw, in some of our sensitivities, we saw like instances of like high densities coming in, and we don't really think that that is really reflective of a native like native selection, other than the model being constrained on being able to add resources of our existing types to meet near-term needs. So Like for instance, like this long duration storage right here, there is so much kind of constraint that is going on in our system. The model is just looking to bring anything in. So I think that we do have this scenario where emerging tech is allowed to come in, but really what we're seeing is that's really bringing in long duration storage. But overall, that is the extent of the impact of emerging tech. Does that answer your question, Chelsea?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I got myself turned around a little bit about what was in the base case and what wasn't. So thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, I apologize. We're going through so many different like iterations of testing and trying to sometimes we end up calling lots of things base case plus and then base case. We probably need to clean up our nomenclature, so I apologize for that too.
No worries. Naming is one of the things that I despise the most about modeling, so I get it. So thank you.
Margie, I'm going to point us to our chat. We have a comment from Darren Zegich. Darren, I'll paraphrase, and if I don't capture it, please come on. From the PRC, he's asking the modeling of net present value for ETA and non-ETA scenarios will account for all costs, that is fixed and variable, total revenue requirements for each scenario. Is that correct?
Yes. Unless I'm Darren, is that accurate on the question?
Yeah, I just clearly wind and solar are much more amenable for market transactions than an old 60-year-old steam plant. So, how are we accounting for that?
Yeah, so we do model within the Encompass model within the Encompass model, we do capture all costs associated with operating costs and also capital costs associated with these projects as well. So unless I'm misunderstanding your question, I do believe we're capturing all the entire revenue requirements associated with these build outs between ETA and non-ETA.
Does it account for any market interaction?
Yes, it does account. So the only time where we well, let me make sure that we're not talking past each other. In our islanded scenarios, we are turning off the market interactions during the production costing. In all capacity expansion runs, we do not have a market interaction. Like so during capacity expansion, that's our standard modeling practice. It's a very standard process across multiple utilities. That the capacity expansion does not have a market interaction, but we do enable the market interaction in all scenarios unless explicitly identified in like that islanded scenarios where the market interaction is included in production cost runs. Is there more, Darren?
Okay, so that I guess I'm just trying to figure out if the market, if you're going to give us this analysis for ETA compliant and ETA non-compliant, certainly a 60-year-old gas plant will give us more capacity value per nameplate capacity than a wind farm. But the wind farm is certainly going to play a bigger role in the net value on an energy standpoint, especially when that gas plant's running at 20% capacity factor. So I just wanted to understand how you square that up at the end of the day, including batteries, which the state of Texas seems to really despise right now. So I'm just trying to figure out how that whole market piece, if you're going to be employing the batteries into the market, how all that is accounted for in the total value proposition.
May have to take your question back. The model is taking into account all the revenue requirements, both fixed, variable, fuel costs. We have in one of the things too, just in all of our slides, you can see our steam generation is retiring. The expectation is all of that will be retiring before 2045. So yes, I would generally say that as your less efficient resources are rolling off and they're being replaced. The model is making a multitude of decisions about adding resources for that are help driving down cost, because of, energy value from a wind resource that is avoiding a fuel cost, and while also not having that same capacity contribution. And, the CTs and CCs coming on that would not necessarily operate at the same capacity value, but provide that much more firm, dispatchability. So the model is taking into account, lots of different kinds of metrics, and it's trying to solve the system on a least cost need throughout the entire planning horizon. So yes, it is taking into account all those interactions that I think you're alluding to.
Okay, thank you.
So
Thanks, Darren and Justin. Anything else we're seeing on Zoom?
I might return us to a couple questions while we wait to see if anybody else in the chat. And I'm getting stereo again. So if there's there. Okay, thank you. Returning to a couple of the open items from workshop number 4. The question about extension of thermal resources. If we could maybe go back to the mind map, I think it's slide 10.
Make people dizzy by the sound of them.
Yeah, you should have some hyperlinks.
Yeah, I should have some hyperlinks. I'll tell you what, in college, I actually got a lower grade on a presentation because of this exact thing. So I apologize.
It's only 94 slides, Justin.
There we go.
It was a
Just a
question.
couple. To the mind map, please. I think another there. So we had a question at workshop 4 about the extension of thermal resources. So where in these scenarios might those be contemplated?
Great question, Kathy. And it was actually, I think that I was planning on having some of that conversation tomorrow because there was Chelsea provided us some specific scenarios that she was talking about with extensions. A couple of thoughts on that is that in general, should you be modeling an extension? I think in an RFP, it makes a lot of sense when you're making a comparison against, extending a thermal resource today or replacement. I think that when you're talking about a retirement that may happen in 2043, just as an example, what do you assume would cost to enable that? What specific thing needs to happen at that facility to get you another 3 years or 4 years or 5 years? Is it a boiler sewer replacement or a hot gas path, or what is that project that allows that for extension? Because there's very different cost assumptions associated with resource extensions of the existing thermal resources. So I think that is always a question that should be had, as resources are retiring and we're making that decision for something that's coming up in much more near term. In the longer term horizon, I really look at the generic replacements as kind of a stand-in for something new to come here, whether that's the extension or replacement.
Okay. Thank you. So sort of near term versus longer term planning.
I think that, yes, and I also think that not to take away from too much from our conversation tomorrow.
Okay.
When we're talking about PPA extensions and things like that, there's also an unknown about what you assume there. Do you assume when a PPA expires that you would be able to maintain that pricing that was previously provided, or would you have to expect some kind of increase for inflation, or what are the triggers for accurately reflecting that price in the future? Additionally, when those PPAs expire, if an extension were to happen there, it would have to be entered into an RFP. And from our past experience from RFPs about the 24 RFP is that proposed extensions of the existing facilities are not necessarily guaranteed to provide you the same static pricing that was previously captured.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Again, I'm getting feedback. I don't know if we have a duplicate stereo there.
I don't think that anybody here has their mics turned on.
Okay.
Have my audio joined at all.
Okay, and I'm going to return to workshop 4 again. The other open item, similar question. Folks were wondering about long battery duration. Where in these scenarios is there sensitivities? Are there sensitivities about long duration storage?
Thank you for the question, Kathy. And so originally in our scenario tree, we were expecting to model it as a force in, similar to like geothermal. But what we saw, when we just talked about with our base plus emerging tech, is that we are seeing long duration storage being natively selected in our model through different years of the planning horizon. Additionally, like what I would say with our RPS scenarios, although we're not presenting that material today, and we still believe that we need to go back and make some corrections, we are seeing long duration storage also be selected in response to the 2045 carbon zero requirement. So and it's not necessarily just the 2045. So we did remove the force in long duration storage runs because we are seeing it natively selected in some of our models.
And okay.
Can
and so even in the base case, you're seeing long duration storage coming in?
Yes, when we allow emerging tech in our base runs.
Okay.
We do see long duration storage being coming into the model.
Kathy, I just want to ask Justin to clarify. When we say long duration storage, what is our definition that we're utilizing for the modeling parameters?
Yes. So right now, what we are including is a 100-hour battery.
100 hours.
Yes.
So it's either 4 hours or 100 hours?
Yes. And that's another sensitivity that we were proposing when we were reviewing some of the stakeholder material or request. We think that it might be worth an additional sensitivity on the base run to allow the 4, 6, and 8 hour batteries to be selected on the same ELCC curve. So the only change would be to the base model would be and this would be sensitivities to allow 6 and 8 hour batteries to be selected, but to have the same interaction on the ELCC curve. So if a 4 hour battery gets selected, it would affect the next battery that came in, whether it's the 6 or 8 hour batteries on its accreditation, or vice versa. If an 8 hour battery came in and then the model would lower the accreditation for the 4 hour battery that may come in after that. I'm just giving some general thoughts on that, but we do believe that that's a sensitivity that we do not have identified today that we would like to talk with stakeholders tomorrow about.
Thank you. Yep, that's just a couple loose ends that I wanted to make sure we address, but I'll open the floor. Anything else from the virtual participants, if you'd raise your hand, and now's your chance.
How about in the room? Any other questions about the scenarios that are being looked at so far? Okay, well, maybe we should preview the stakeholder requested runs. I mean, one of them is on the duration, storage sensitivity and parameters, right?
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
So maybe this will give folks some thought overnight about whether this set that Justin described plus this additional set seems to represent what you think is important. And does that make sense to at least starting that? We have some time. Okay.
Yes, I think we can do that.
Okay.
And I learned a new thing, so I found a way to not.
Oh.
I can jump around the slide deck more efficiently. Also. All right, so stakeholder proposed scenarios. We received 6 scenarios from EFG, and we also have we had 2 responses to our information request from stakeholders. One was from the New Mexico PRC staff, and then one was from Farm Energy. So what we saw, and Chelsea, feel free to jump into the conversation if I mischaracterized anything. We saw 4 scenarios of the 6 provided, presenting an alternative load forecast. And I really would like to have that conversation tomorrow because we do have our load forecasting team then. Some of the other assumptions were some changes to emerging tech assumptions, whether that's assumptions on tax credits or the in-service dates available for some of these projects, or the overall cost of capital for these, or capital costs for these different resource types. We have some thoughts. We'd like to have a discussion about that. I don't know if we're gonna try to put in this hour.
I think we do it tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? I think just giving people the sense of what was suggested, so they could think about that and complement to those on the line now.
Gotcha. So that was the overall thoughts. The variables that I saw from EFG was alternative load forecasting, changes to assumptions on emerging tech, potential for inclusion of existing resource extensions. The existing resource extensions that were provided as proposals were specific around PPA extensions. And then also some potential alternative island scenarios where the summer PRM requirement was effectively carried through all months of the year. So instead of just removing the winter PRM requirement, just maintaining the summer PRM requirement through all period of time. The question I have on that one is resource accreditation assumptions, and we can probably talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. From other stakeholders, the Mexico PRC staff, during our questionnaire, we asked some specific questions around the scenarios that we can talk about today: data centers, the assumption around nuclear, assumption around geothermal. What we saw from the Mexico PRC staff is understanding what it would be like to build a decoupled system from the SPP planning reserve margin requirements, and I apologize for misspelling PRM as RPM. And also removing locational transmission constraints if they existed. I don't believe that we really have, and I might reach out to the Mexico PRC staff if you we're talking about this tomorrow. Currently in the model we have locational value of resources. So if a resource, when we have a retirement, we allow resources to come in at that location that do not have a transmission adder added to it. That represents the avoidance of a network upgrade cost. And then transmission costs are added to our base generics. Just to remind folks, our base assumption on transmission network upgrade costs are $125 per kW. We have some information citing that really is kind of the point at which projects move forward through the SPP DICES is at $125 per kW. The other feedback we got was the desire to see multi-day storage modeled in the IRP. And I do believe that is something that we've captured inside of our current modeling today.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if we might hear from the authors of these scenario requests at this point and see. I know Chelsea from EFG and Darren from PRC staff, and I think Ray is on from Form Energy, folks who submitted these. We're wondering if you could talk a little bit about your interests in these scenarios, a little bit of context for the other stakeholders in the room to appreciate what was behind your interest in these particular scenarios. So did any one of you want to give some more color to the rest of us in the room about these various scenarios? And that would be, Chelsea or Darren or Ray. Would you like to add any basis, commentary, color to these requests? Yeah, please go ahead, Chelsea.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I would just say that it's kind of hard to give a high level summary because I know we gave some pretty specific details, especially around the emerging tech. But I think in terms of the load forecast, what we were interested in, and I know we'll get into this tomorrow because we still had some open questions about differences in the base planning forecast and low load forecast, was just testing the large load assumptions and only including customers that have a signed electric service agreement. We also wanted to see the possibility of a lower electric vehicle forecast because that does have an impact in the later part of the planning period when the system switches from a summer peak to a winter peak. So that was driving our alternative load forecast assumptions. We just had, several changes we wanted to see on the emerging tech side as it relates to capital costs that we've seen and other IRPs, when those resources can be available, and looking at some different constraints around how much of those resources could be selected in the model. On the alternative islanded approach, we talked about this a lot. It's really hard to look at an islanded approach because SPS will be doing the study to get at those assumptions to model for a PRM and resource accreditation for the 2028 requirement, but we don't have the benefit of that right now. So what we're trying to recommend is maintaining that summer and winter system dynamic, but instead of having the winter PRM published by SPS, you would still maintain the winter accreditation resources, but the winter PRM would be equivalent to the summer PRM percentage that SPS is already modeling. And so in terms of the existing resource extension, here are the concerns that were already expressed today, but I think that in the supply side resource, world we live in right now with cost impacts, existing resources are becoming ever more important. And I think there is a place where it exists between being able to take advantage of existing resources and proactively talking to who you already are in a contract with and trying to get an understanding of the availability of resource extensions. I understand that there's an RFP process too, but I do think there's a difference between existing resources and generic resources on a cost basis. And so we were just interested on what that impact would do if you did extend some of the PPAs that are supposed to retire in the planning period.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. Anything you want to follow up with on that now, or we'll hold till tomorrow, Justin?
I don't think so. I think that so tomorrow, Chelsea, what I envision is have that conversation with John, talk a little bit about load forecasting, new emerging tech assumptions. We have some material in the slide deck, and we'll have Dr. Moot provide some of the conversation about or probably lead some of that conversation to discuss your alternatives versus what we have currently, and we'll try to figure out a path forward on that. And then on the existing resource extensions, I'd love to have a conversation about it. I agree with you. I think that there is potential value. I still struggle with what assumptions you make to enable these extensions, because it is not just a standard assumption that can be made either for existing ownership facilities like thermal resources like 1, 2, or 3, like I mentioned previously, what it takes to enable those resources, and also for PPA explorations, because it is not my experience that it can be reasonably expected that PPA pricing would maintain the values that are in the current contracts. But I think I'd love to have more discussion with you about tomorrow.
Margie, can I ask something to Chelsea based on that? Chelsea, this is Matt Larson in the room. I mean, do you have thoughts for us to kind of think on overnight with respect to what the tails on those PPAs should look like?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we could do. You could make an assumption. You either model them at their existing cost, or you don't put a cost in at all. You compare that run to your base case and see what that PVR difference is. We have a little bit of trouble here under our scenarios because we have some other assumptions in that. So I think it'd be a question of, you'd have to do a run just with the existing resource extensions, compare that PVR to your base run, see what the difference is. And that would give you an idea of what that threshold cost would be. I also know that, I was involved with the Excel Minnesota IRP. I don't know if there's any information that can be leveraged for some of the thermal PPAs that were able to be extended for their jurisdiction. But I think there's a way. I think there's a way that we can think about looking at, trying to get an approximation of what that would look like if they were extended, but yeah, I'm happy to have more conversation about it.
Thanks for that.
Great. Yeah, thanks for offering that, Chelsea. Kind of helps people think about what that next set of parameters should look like. Darren, would you like to comment a little bit on your team's request?
Yeah, I'm not sure I remember, but I think the locational transmission constraint was more at the time that this comment was made. I think that was we were hearing from the commission on this on the 66 on the resource case, and that was kind of a little bit of the angst from the commission was that we were limiting ourselves to where SPP was could where we could take advantage of extra trans or existing interconnections, and that there wasn't much real time allowance to look for new locations. And I see that now. I joined 2 hours late, so I apologize. I had another commitment, but it looks like we're looking at also upgrades to existing facilities, which is always nice. You can reuse some of that infrastructure, but if that continues, if SPP continues to be a bottleneck for accessing transmission right of ways, then that's concerning. But I don't suspect that you're assuming that in the 2040s and even the late 2030s that there's a bottleneck due to SPP DICES analysis. As far as I think we've talked multiple times about the decoupling, and Chelsea mentioned that too about what if you ran a scenario with just the summer PRM and didn't boost up that winter PRM? What does that look like? Do we get some significant cost savings there? And I know there's not a lot you can do with that, but because it's just like violating the ETA or violating some federal law. It's cut in stone, and not much you can do about it. But I think that was just, we were curious as to how much that is impacting the overall costs when especially when these things change from year to year. That seems a little onerous to be able to plan into the future when you have no idea what the future holds for PRM or for ELCC on a lot of these resources. And that's always a little concerning. So, and then I just wanted to give a shout out for Form Energy's request for multi-day storage. I think that's certainly critical. That and nuclear or some other alternative zero carbon resource if we're ever going to get to that New Mexico compliant resource plan. So thank you.
Any comments or follow-up questions from your end?
Yeah, and thank you, Darren, so much for that. I think that I share some like your concerns, like changing things from year to year. That is a difficult challenge. I think that we're making our best assumptions, and I think that they're rooted in solid practices with understanding what the PRM requirements should be projected out in the future, as well as accreditation. I think that from what I'm hearing, I think that we're probably good on the locational transmission constraints. And I would agree with you, like, what we're projecting out in the 2040s, is not necessarily like an inability to connect resources because of any Southwest Power Pool planning practices right now. I would say that, just for folks to know, is the Southwest Power Pool, it's the DICES process is to help identify network recovery costs and assign those. That is a value add to understand exactly what it costs to connect a resource to the transmission system. I agree with you that right currently it's translating into very long study times and connections, and I think that those processes can always be improved. But ultimately, attributing and understanding what network upgrade costs are important. I think in an RFP solicitation, understanding exactly what those network upgrade costs are on an explicit project is much more important to have a locational transmission constraints. But when we're talking about generic resources, I think it's a valid assumption to assume $125 per kW adder as a general understanding that there is a cost here and we're taking into account without overly penalizing, a resource selection, based solely upon transmission network cost. It's kind of going towards, some of Chelsea's thoughts on, existing resource extension value. Anytime you can, you take advantage of an existing locational system, there is going to be some cost of the wins, and trying to understand and calculate what that exact value is. We might have some varying thoughts on exactly how to do that, but I think that is a clear value of existing point of interconnection as compared to a new one. So.
And one thing I'll add to that is we talked about this at one of the early meetings, is just the transition from DICES to consolidated planning process.
Yeah.
So where we're at today is we're not in position to truly understand the ramifications of what is the network upgrade cost going to look like coming out of CPP, because we're starting just to do the transition study now. So, those costs for transmission network upgrades, as Justin said, are needed for the safe and reliable interconnection of these units, as well as also hedging off some of those congestion costs. That if we would have just thrown them onto the system without those network upgrades, we would also be seeing a lot of congestion on the back end, which would then also be a negative for the consumers. So the cost of moving forward and finding that right balance point of what are those network upgrades out of the DICES is extremely important. We do need to reflect that. The question is, in the future RFP, we'll be taking into account the CPP. And how does that look, and how does that get reflected, and what will those actual bid costs look like? But we just don't have that information today. So I think reflecting what we do know in the DICES is, we have to have something in there to identify constraints, because that is a cost that will always be there for new generators, not for surplus and not for replacement, but for greenfield. And the only way to really incrementally solve new load in our system is through greenfield solutions.
Thanks, Jerry. All right.
And I
Thank
think,
you. Yeah.
I think
Hand
we've
up.
got-
Go ahead, Margie.
Yeah, Ray Brigham is on the line from Form Energy. Would you like to introduce yourself and offer any commentary or motivation behind your particular modeling run request?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, Ray Brigham, Form Energy. This will be brief. I think that the general motivation behind our request is we feel that the market for longer duration energy storage has been established, especially with the number of deployments announced for the pre-2030 timeframe. And we would like to see longer duration multi-day storage considered as a candidate resource rather than simply an evolving or emerging technology, which includes, in some of the reference cases and as well as the other numerous sensitivities that have been mentioned. There's some pretty ambitious climate goals that are being covered in resource sensitivities, and as was discussed earlier, the fact that it's being natively selected in the model. We would like to see the combined impact of some of these sensitivities while also considering long duration storage as a candidate resource. I really appreciate the chance to engage. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any follow-up questions you have for Ray?
I don't know that we have any follow-up questions at this time, but I'll definitely be thinking about it overnight and see if there's anything. This is a lot for me to digest as well, not just one street here. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, we wanted to give this an opportunity to sort of percolate, and now you all can see what's on the plate of analyses that the utility is doing, what was on the minds of stakeholders so far to be looked at. And we'd like to then re-engage these conversations so that by the end of tomorrow, we have a sense from the stakeholders about whether this represents the set of interests that you have, and it looks like a complete set to you or not. If not, we'll be asking you how to supplement what's already on the table for modeling. But with that, let me turn to Kathy and see if there's anything else on this conversation you feel we should tackle today, or should we give folks a bit of early departure to be able to recharge for tomorrow?
Yeah, I think maybe if you want to go to our couple last slides, just to sort of set the table for what we'd like people to percolate on overnight.
Yep, we'll do. Let me share those then. Stand by a moment.
I can bring it up too, Margie, if that's easier for you.
Yeah, Kathy, could you please?
Sure. Yeah, I think we left off here. Does that look about right?
Yeah, if you hit the next slide, please.
Yep.
So question we want you to think about overnight, looking at the mind map and hearing the presentation about what's been submitted by stakeholders for additional runs. Are there other uncertainties or issues you want to have tested in the modeling? That's going to be what we're going to ask you tomorrow. And so give some thought to that. And then with the next, we'll resume our conversation around that topic tomorrow. And then next slide, Kathy, what we've done today is you've been exposed to a number of model results, and there are many, many more details in the slide deck that's posted on the GridWorks website. So if you're curious about something you can't sleep tonight, pull up the slide and have a look at it. So we'll have continental breakfast available at 8 tomorrow, and we'll begin at 8:30 with this continued discussion about stakeholder modeling run interests. When we complete that conversation, again, we're going to be asking you, do you agree? And then I'm going to turn to Linda.
For those in the room that couldn't see what Kathy put in, can you remind them how to get to that slide deck on your website? Because I'm not sure all these guys are familiar with getting to the materials on your website.
Yeah, Kathy, can you show the next slide, please? All right, let's go all the way to the end. Slide number 20, if you might. So here's that gridworks.org initiatives Excel-SPS is the GridWorks website where all workshop materials are available, including the decks for today. Thank you, Linda. That site also has the forms in case you wish to request access to the iManage system for seeing detailed data inputs and outputs from modeling. And so please go there to the GridWorks website if you need any materials from today or from prior workshops. And then if you have additional questions, both Deb Shields on the GridWorks team and Linda Hudgens from the Excel SPS team are happy to take questions that you have now or anytime during this process. So we will review this again when we complete tomorrow, but wanted to make sure you had access to the slide deck. We know it got posted late last night, so you probably haven't had a chance to study it, but feel free to browse in there and bring any additional questions for tomorrow. So with that, Justin, Jared, Linda, any closing comments from the SPS team from today?
I don't have any closing comments. I thank you for your time. I really appreciate everybody being on the call. I appreciate the engagement of the conversation. It's been very insightful to understand all these different perspectives from folks, and it's also, you know, it's been very helpful and challenging to me to make sure that we are being responsive to everybody's requests and making and improving my model things to make sure that we're capturing you know, all the appropriate planning processes for the future. So thank you so much for everybody.
Great. All right, Kathy, anything from anybody else on Zoom? Any questions, any issues?
Nope, I'll just note 8:30, meeting will start. I know the room is probably be there about 8, but for virtual folks, please join us by 8:30 tomorrow and we'll pick up from that question of what uncertainties do you want tested?
Great,
Thank
and
you.
we will troubleshoot the dropping of the Zoom call from the main computer. We'll work on that tonight as well. Hopefully we won't have that technical challenge tomorrow. Thank you for your patience, everyone, in dealing with that little glitch that we had a couple times today. Thank you, and we'll see you all tomorrow.